Summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Christoph, and today we're going to be talking about some pretty big changes coming on patch 11.1. This patch will bring the preseason to its end, and with that, the official launch of Season 11 will be upon us. With it being the first patch of the new ranked season, this will be the last chance that Riot will have to make sure that we start off the year as smooth as possible, so that the changes we see here should be pretty significant. But before we get into all of that, today's question of the day is, what changes do you think Riot still needs to make before the new season? But wait until you've watched the whole video, because I think you'll have an idea of what's on the list of upcoming changes. And then if you think something is being swept under the rug that may still be an issue next season, let us know in the comments down below. Alright guys, starting off, let's talk about each item buff, why it's happening, and what we think of the change. For all Grievous Wound items, the debuff duration will be going from 2 seconds to 3 seconds. This change is being made for a pretty obvious reason. Out of all the builds that people have been messing around with, some of the most successful revolve around surviving burst and healing a ton afterwards, and there are builds for it across multiple roles. If you've seen a Swain with a Zhonya's Riftmaker, an Aatrox or Fiora with Ravenous Hydra, Gore Drinker and Sterix Gauge, or any ADC building Immortal Shield Bow and Bloodthirster, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The problem is, if you can't burst these targets down from 100 to 0, they can often heal back to full in just a couple of seconds. This change is aimed at making sure that your Grievous Wounds last longer so they don't get a second of time to heal up. But I'm honestly not too happy with this change. The problem is buffing Grievous Wounds either by the intensity of the effect or time it lasts, in my opinion, isn't a healthy option for targeting healing from items. Instead, I think the healing from items should be brought down. This is so that you aren't indirectly nerfing champions that rely on healing from abilities like Vlad and Fiddle just to nerf certain item builds. Shurelya's Battle Song is seeing its movement speed go up from 40 to 60%. The idea behind Enchanter Mythics is Moonstone Renewer for healing in extended fights, Imperial Mandate to add some extra damage when you're going aggressive, and Shurelya's Battle Song when you want to give your allies some extra engage power. The thing is, both Moonstone and Imperial Mandate are just too juicy to pass up at the moment, since they aren't tied to a longer active cooldown, and you can proc them several times in a single fight. With extra movement speed being given to Shurelya's, it serves as a tool to enable your team much better, but only time will tell if that makes it worth more than the less situational items. Archangel's Staff and Seraph's Embrace are having their AP up from 60 to 65, with the Sapphire Crystal in Archangel's build path being replaced by an Amplifying Tome. With the build path already including Tear of the Goddess, the extra Sapphire Crystal takes up an item slot without actually providing any type of meaningful stat. Being able to pick up the Amp Tome at least gives a tiny bit more power to your power curve as you're farming out the finished item. The extra 5 AP on the finished item is technically a buff, but I'm not really seeing that affect the power of any of the champs that build it. I'd really like to see some ability haste added, even if it's just to the evolved Seraphs. With the shield being lost, I think this would be a great way to show the power spike of fully stacking up the passive without suddenly providing an insanely strong active. Lastly, Ionian Boots of Lucidity is getting an increase in ability haste, going from 15 to 20. Ability haste can be a lot harder to build on certain AP champs than AD ones, especially supports. While Moonstone Renewer may grant a haste mythic passive, it's only 5 per item, and not all supports want to be forced into Moonstone just for the mythic stats, as they may prefer the damage and movement speed from Imperial Mandate's procs. The thing is, I don't think this actually solves the issue of being unable to get haste at all. As someone who enjoys playing enchanters from time to time, usually when they ban Malphite because he's extremely OP right now, I really do miss the cooldown reduction you would get from picking up Ardent or Redemption. Maybe we can get it back on the completed items without it being part of Forbidden Idol. If I am autofilled in support, I actually do hate the feeling that I need Cosmic Drive on a support just to be able to shield and heal at a reasonable rate. Next up, we have some item adjustments. These aren't necessarily buffs or nerfs, but rather shifting power from one place to another in favor of healthier gameplay. The first change listed here is shifting damage from upfront burst into stats. The items affected are Duskblade of Drakthar, Prowler's Claw, or remember the first video when items came out and I said Prowler's Crawl? Gosh, that was a funny video. Hextech Rocket Belt, Night Harvest, Trinity Force, Gore Drinker, and Stride Breaker. Burst damage has been pretty rampant though all of preseason. In fact, it's such a strong playstyle that you could even thrive on a marksman if you were building Eclipse or Duskblade and Collector, relying on your opening burst of damage more than the consistent DPS that makes up the identity of the marksman class. This is obviously pretty unhealthy for the game, and as a result, we're seeing all that damage toned back. But Riot doesn't want to completely choke out the champions that rely on these items and builds to be successful. The damage is actually just going to be redistributed into the item stats so that you can get the damage out over a few seconds, not a few frames. If you're interested in the exact changes, check out our video from a few days ago detailing this part specifically. Runaan's Hurricane is receiving a pretty big adjustment, seeing its cost drop from 3,400 to 2,500 gold, having its 25 AD fully removed, and the pickaxe in its build path being changed to a dagger. On top of that, the passive bolts will no longer scale from 40% to 70% of your attack damage, and will instead be 40% all game. Compared to its sister items, Runaan's is way too expensive. All three other items that build out of Zeal just cost 2,500 gold. Power spike on those items may be weaker in some cases, but they are also much quicker, making it way more worth, even against melee heavy teams where Runaan's would otherwise be super valuable thanks to the cleaving damage. The only champs that build Runaan's currently are Crit Kaisa, Ashe, and Twitch. For pretty much all other marksmen, you're going to be seeing situational Zeal items fit best. With this change bringing its cost in line with other items, it'll be a great choice against melee-heavy teams as almost any marksman, giving you potential for some pretty high damage if you can constantly pump attacks into 3 targets at once. The last item adjustment we're seeing is to Muramana. The shock passive will go back to applying on hit and from spells of all damage types. The total cost will be going from 2,600 to 2,900 gold, and the Sapphire Crystal in the build path is being replaced by a longsword, similar to the buff Archangel's staff is getting. Additionally, the shock passive damage is being lowered from 4% to 2.5%, but the passive will now be 2.5% of mana converted into AD, up from 2%. So just on 10.25, Muramana was changed so that only physical damage spells could apply the shock passive. This was done because of how overtuned the item was when built on mages. We even did a video talking about how the build was so broken on Orianna that a player used it to break 1,000 LP in Korea. However, this poses a couple of issues. What about when you damage someone with Ezreal's E or his ult? What about Kai'Sa's W? Instead of adjusting the shock passive to scale with AD or anything complicated like that, the shock damage was just lowered overall, and instead the power was pushed to the AD conversion passive of Awe. I kind of hope they bump that up just a bit, as I think losing almost half of the shock passive is going to hurt a lot, especially since the item is just straight up more expensive now. With all these changes, of course, comes the new season. If you guys get ranked anxiety, or if you guys want to get into gold or higher, I highly recommend going to ProGuides and getting a challenger coach this week. We have a ton of resources to get you guys into the division of your choice after your promos. The promos can be super stressful, and there's no better time to practice than right now. Now let's move on to the champion changes, starting with the nerfs. Master Yi's Q cooldown is getting a hit, going from 18 to 14 seconds up to 18 to 16 seconds. Okay, so one thing I agree with here, Yi does need some nerfs. He's been doing really well with the new items since the start of the preseason, and with crit items getting buffed and almost all other junglers being nerfed either directly or via items, he's doing even better now, so good job, Riot. But never once when being pentakilled by a Yi have I thought, oh man, I wish his Q was just a bit longer of a cooldown. Being that he gets his Q reset by autoing and he autos lightning speed late game, this just really isn't a nerf you're going to notice in most cases. So yes, good intention, Riot, but let's get a better solution, please. Fiddlesticks will have his W cooldown go from 9 to 7 seconds up to 10 to 8 seconds. Again, like the Yi change, this isn't really quite it. Sure, W is his bread and butter for clearing the jungle and dueling champs, but what makes Fiddlesticks so oppressive to play against is his ult. It should definitely be a powerful ganking and teamfighting tool, but a reasonable change would be to increase the cooldown of his ult by a good 30 or so seconds at rank 1, so he can't jump scare you over walls as frequently. Our last nerf is going to be coming to Pantheon. His health regen is going from 10 to 9, and his Empowered W's AD scaling is going from 135% to 165%, down to 120% to 165%. Okay, so before it went live, we weren't really too sure what to make of Pantheon's change. Was he going to just be a higher damage, more poke-heavy support, or would he actually be a decent solo laner? Well, let's just say he's one of the highest win rate champs in both top and mid now. He does well into most matchups, he still has his roaming power, and he's still great at snowballing a lead into an early win. The thing is, just like the nerfs to the last two previous champions, I don't see these changes doing much to topple him from his current spot. If he's in one of his few bad matchups, he's still going to lose it, and if it's a matchup he wins, losing 1 HP per 5 seconds isn't going to really affect him much. Sure, the weaker early game Empowered W autos will make him a little bit less of a bully, but he's not going to suddenly lose previously winning lanes because of it. Maybe we can see a bit of damage off of his Q, something that you actually spam and use to win lane. I don't know, just floating ideas. You know, our office is actually a block away from Riot, so maybe I should just go walk over there and tell them myself. Alright guys, let's take a look at some of the champion buffs as well. Ryze is having his Q's mana cost go from 40 at all ranks to 40 to 32 depending on your rank. This is another case of technically a buff in quotation marks. Like, yeah, it's a positive change, but not one that literally anyone will notice. Ryze is still going to be stomped by almost every other meta mid laner early game, and as a result, won't have a chance to really scale to his mid to late game power spike. It's been a while, guys, but I think at this point, it's just time for another Ryze rework. Qiyana is also having her health regen bumped up from 8.5 to 9. Her HP regen per level increased from 0.65 to 0.9, and her base AD raised from 64 to 66. As we've said since the start of preseason, assassins have been thriving. Well, most of them. Qiyana is maybe the one that actually had a pretty bad time despite the new shiny OP items at her disposal. Some extra regen for lane would be nice if it was more significant, and if Qiyana was stuck laning against poke-heavy mages every game, but since mid lane is currently dominated by all-in champs like Echo, Fizz, and Pantheon, it's a pretty negligible stat. The base AD increase is definitely nice, but she could use a little bit more help, like some extra pushing power in her Q or a lower cooldown on her combos. Xayah's E cooldown is being lowered from 12 to 8 seconds down to 10 to 8 seconds, and the mana cost is being lowered from 40 down to 30. While in the early game 2 seconds off her E is pretty nice, this isn't going to change Xayah from one of the worst ADCs in the game to being a decent pick. Xayah's E is what you max first, so after level 9 you won't even notice a difference. Karma's shield is having its later levels increased, going from 80 to 200 up to 80 to 240. Finally, we're seeing a significant buff here. Remember, since Karma can potentially mantra shield herself and all 4 teammates, that's an extra 200 HP for the enemy team to cut through. On top of that, factor in your support items, healing and shielding power buffs, and this change will actually be pretty impactful. It won't make her the absolute best scaling enchanter, but that was never really Karma's job to begin with. Now you can be a lane bullying enchanter and then transition into a mid to late game shield bot just a little bit better. The last champ on the buff list is Gnar. His Mega Q damage is going from 5 to 165 up to 25 to 205, while its slow is going from 15 to 35 up to 30 to 50. Mega E's dash range is moving up from 600 to 675, with mini forms E's attack speed duration going from 4 seconds up to 6 seconds. Gnar is a champ that Riot usually seems to take baby steps with, giving the tiniest of buffs, since once he enters the meta, he's unbearable to deal with, as he can bully lane, split push, and carry fights with his mega form. However, he's been really bad for a while, and I think everyone's known that. I'm personally glad he's getting some actual love, even though I kind of really didn't like playing against him when he was good. While the extra damage on his Q is nice, the really good part is that huge slow increase. The sticking power from that slow, along with the extra jump range in Mega, means you'll feel a lot less like a helpless, kiteable fat blob, and more like a primal beast that can actually chase down and kill an enemy. You are a prehistoric Yordle. You are not Tom Kench, just remember that. The buff to his attack speed duration after using E in mini form is a nice way to buff him, since it gives him more power in committed trades as opposed to buffing the poking power in his Q or the burst of his W. All in all, I'm super happy to see these Gnar changes and can't wait to see him become a viable pick again. Alright guys, our last section of changes has to do with the champion adjustments, and in it, we will have Yone and Yasuo. But before we get into the last section, just a reminder about our new VOD feature. All you have to do to get your game analyzed by a challenger player is press a button on ProGuides.com. One of our amazing pro players will take a look at it, give you a voiceover video in return, so that you know exactly what you need to do in preseason to get into the rank that you deserve. Alright, now into the last section for both champs. Both Yone and Yasuo, their passive will go from granting 100% bonus crit chance up to 150%. Additionally, the passive crit conversion, which converts all crit chance over 100% into bonus AD, will be going from 0.5 AD for every 1% extra critical chance down to 0.4 AD for every 1% extra critical chance. Yasuo's AD per level will be going down from 3.2 to 2.2, and Yone's AD per level will be going down from 3 to 2. Yes, that's a lot of numbers, and yes, it's very hard to comprehend, but basically, Yone and Yasuo have a weird time adapting to the new crit items. The Ginsu's build was just too strong, but since it was fixed, players have struggled to find builds that are actually strong on the Wind Brothers. It's especially awkward since the new items give 20% crit chance each, meaning that as Yone or Yasuo, you're forced to build a third crit item, which causes you to go 20% over the cap. So it's just not efficient. Sure, your passive converts that into extra AD, but it means you can't really build situational items, like Death's Dance or Steric's Gauge, without giving up a huge chunk of damage. This change will give you options. If you want pure damage, a third crit item may be optimal, but if you need certain item passives or actives, you're now free to at least pick up what you need. Before the video ends, I want to give some closing thoughts on these changes though. Overall, the item changes as well as some champ changes are pretty good. I'm particularly happy with the Karma and Gnar buffs, as well as the Yone and Yasuo adjustments. We all know they needed help. However, I think a lot of the other champs on the list that had their buffs and nerfs, they really missed the mark hard. So if you guys want to help us all out and maybe DM Riot on Twitter or maybe even comment down below, say, hey Riot, please balance the game before the new season, that might be nice. I get that Riot wants to be cautious since this patch is the one we're starting the season on, but you can't really give baby step buffs to champs with like a 45% win rate. So someone who's invested a ton of time into those champions, well, to be honest, it's wasted time because at a 45% win rate, they're pretty bad. These little slap on the wrist nerfs to these champions aren't going to make a difference. And so I feel for all of you guys who have put a ton of time into champions like Qiyana, for example. Luckily for me, Malphite is OP. I've been playing him for a long time, and for the most part, top laners are pretty easy to play. Hopefully Riot will wake up and push more changes before 11.1. Let me know what you guys think down below. And that's it guys for the upcoming 11.1 changes. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Once again, it's been Christoph with you. I can't wait to see you guys all for the new season. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. It helps us a lot. And I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Once again, that's it for this video. Good luck on the Rift. Stay safe. Wash those hands. And I'll see you on the Rift.